I want to start today's deep dive by asking you to picture a very specific, very rare piece of paper.
Okay. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, I bet you do. It's a residency permit. And back in 1983, there were just very few people on Earth who held one of these.
Right, because we are talking about a document issued by a state that is, what, less than half a square mile in size?
Exactly. A tiny walled-off state that has its own army, its own laws, its own bank.
And its own absolute monarch.
Yes, you're talking about Vatican City. And for the listener, you have to understand, holding that permit is like holding a golden ticket.
It really is. It means you aren't just some tourist taking pictures at St. Peter's, and you aren't just a visiting priest passing through for a conference.
Right. You are a citizen of the fortress.
You live inside the walls.
And that is exactly what makes the source material we are looking into today so incredibly baffling. We are examining the life of Emanuela Orlandi,
She was 15 years old.
15. Her father was a lay employee of the papal household, so she lived right there inside the Vatican walls.
She literally walked past the Swiss Guard every single day. She played in the Vatican gardens as a kid.
Which means she was arguably living in the most secure, surveilled, and heavily protected enclave on the planet.
And yet, on a sweltering hot afternoon in June of 1983, she walked out of those gates and
She was just erased.
erased. That really is the right word here.
Because usually, when a teenager goes missing, unfortunately, the theories are usually pretty local.
Right, the tragic but standard scenarios. A runaway, a local predator, an accident.
Yeah. But when we look at the stack of sources for this deep dive,
Mm.
and I mean, it is a massive stack of files, we aren't seeing a normal missing persons case.
Not at all. We are seeing a complete collision of worlds.
A collision that involves Cold War intelligence agencies, the Roman Mafia, international terrorists, and the absolute highest echelons of the Catholic Church.
It's a mystery that has literally been called Italy's national trauma.
And the whole mission of our deep dive today, the reason we are doing this now, 40 years later, is because the case is suddenly wide open again.
It's exploding. As of late 2023, it's unprecedented.
Yeah, explain that to everyone because it's huge.
Well, we currently have 3 separate investigations running simultaneously. You have the Vatican's own promoter of justice finally opening a file, which, by the way, is historic in itself.
Right, they never do that.
Never. Then you have the Rome prosecutor's office taking another look, and on top of that, you have a bicameral parliamentary commission in the Italian government.
So suddenly, after 40 years, everyone is looking for Emanuela.
After decades of silence, denial, and obstruction, the floodgates have just opened, and the question for us is, why now?
And can these 3 investigations actually untangle 40 years of lies?
That's the real challenge.
So our goal today is to parse through the 3 main competing narratives found in all these newly analyzed sources.
We're looking at the spy story, the mob story, and the internal Vatican scandal.
And I should warn you, if you're listening, these theories are not mutually exclusive.
No, they bleed into each other in ways that are frankly terrifying.
They really do. And we need to be clear right off the bat. This isn't just a story about a missing girl.
It's a story about power. The power to control a narrative, the power to move bodies, and the power to keep a secret for half a century.
So let's go back to the beginning. We need to set the scene properly for you. It's Rome, June 22, 1983.
And from every single report I've read, the heat that day was oppressive.
It was a suffocating heat wave. Rome in June can be brutal anyway, but this was a scorcher.
And amidst all this heat, Emanuela is just living the life of a normal kid. She's the 4th of 5 children.
Her father, Urquell, works for the Pope. Her family lives in a spacious apartment inside the Vatican.
I think it's hard for a lot of people to conceptualize what that life is actually like.
It really is. It's a village, essentially. A tiny, exclusive village.
According to her brother, Pietro Orlandi, who, by the way, we will talk about a lot today because he really is the hero of this story in many ways, they grew up feeling incredibly safe.
Yeah, they had the run of the gardens. It was a complete bubble.
So on this specific Wednesday, Emanuela is just going about her routine. She plays the flute. She attends the Tommaso Ludovico da Vittoria School of Music,
Which is a very prestigious school. And it's located in Piazza di Sant'Apollinare.
Now, I want everyone to pay attention to that name, Sant'Apollinare. That specific location is going to come back to haunt this story later on.
Definitely took that name away. It's just across the river, right?
Yeah.
Outside Vatican territory near Piazza Navona.
Right, so she leaves the family apartment around 4 p.m., and she's running late.
And this is where we get the very first heartbreaking detail of the timeline. She asks her brother, Pietro, for a ride.
She asks him to drive her to the lesson, And Pietro, well, he's a young guy. He has his own plans for the afternoon. He says no.
He tells her to just take the bus.
And he has lived with that no for over 40 years.
It's devastating. In almost every interview he gives in the source material, he mentions it.
It's that ultimate sliding doors moment. If he had just said yes, if he had driven her straight to the door of the school, the man in the green BMW never gets to her.
The Avon lady job offer never happens. History changes entirely. But he said no.
So she takes the bus, she gets to the music school, and before her lesson actually starts, she makes a phone call home.
She calls her sister, Federica.
And this is where the mystery officially kicks off. She tells Federica that she was approached by a man on her way to school.
A man who offered her a job.
Right, a job handing out flyers for Avon Cosmetics at a fashion show by the Fontanelle sisters.
Now, on the surface, you hear that, and it sounds like a standard lure. But there was a specific detail that Federica clocked immediately.
The money.
The pay was just astronomical.
It was completely absurd.
Yeah.
The man offered her 375,000 lire.
We really need to pause and contextualize that number for the listener. Because unless you have an inflation calculator handy, 375,000 lire from 1983 doesn't mean much.
Right. So in 1983, for a teenage girl, for maybe 2 or 3 hours of passing out flyers, that is the equivalent of handing a kid today something like 600 or 700 euros.
It was essentially a monthly salary for some people, being offered for a single afternoon of distributing pamphlets.
And Federica realizes immediately that this doesn't smell right.
She tells Emanuela, no, that is way too much money. Nobody pays that kind of cash. Do not sign anything. Come home and talk to mom and dad first.
Which is incredibly smart advice from an older sister. And it tells us something vital about the predator, doesn't it?
It really does. It tells us he knew exactly how to hook a teenager.
Exactly. You don't offer a realistic wage if you want to override their basic stranger danger instinct. You offer a dream.
You offer an amount so high that the greed, or just the sheer excitement, completely short-circuits their logic. It was a highly calculated psychological trap.
So Emanuela hangs up, she goes to her flute lesson, she comes out around 7 p.m.
And she talks to 2 of her classmates about the job offer. So
Yeah.
she's clearly still thinking about it. She hasn't dismissed it.
She's waiting for the bus on Corso Rinascimento. Now this is right in front of the Palazzo Madama, which is the building that houses the Italian Senate.
So it's a busy, very high-security area. Lots of guards.
Yes. And she is seen there around 7:30 p.m.
And this is where, for a very long time, the public timeline just stopped. But when you look at the deeper files, specifically the police reports from the initial investigation, there were witnesses.
There were. And not just any random bystanders. 2 police officers, actual uniformed officers on duty at the Senate building, recalled seeing a girl matching Emanuela's description.
She was talking to a man.
She was. And the man was holding an Avon bag.
So the job offer wasn't some hallucination or a cover story she made up. The Avon man was real.
He was physically there right in front of the Senate. And the officers noted something else. A car.
A dark green BMW.
Exactly. A dark green BMW parked right there.
Now, this brings us to one of the most frustrating what-ifs in the entire source material. There was a Secret Service agent involved very early on here, a guy named Giulio Gangi.
Giulio Gangi is a key figure who so often gets written out of the summary versions of this story, which is a shame. He was an agent with ISDE, that's the Italian Domestic Intelligence Agency.
But more importantly for our story, he was a friend of the Orlandi family.
So when he hears Emanuela is missing, he doesn't wait for official protocols or a task force to be formed. He starts working immediately.
He essentially goes rogue.
He does. He uses his badge, his connections, and his skills to track that car. He takes the description, dark green BMW, probably a late 1970s model, and he literally hunts it down.
And the crazy part is he actually finds it.
He finds it. He locates a dark green BMW at a mechanic shop in Rome in the days immediately following the disappearance.
And here's the detail that will just make the hair on your arms stand up. The car had a window that had been broken from the inside.
Broken from the inside.
That screams a struggle. That is someone trying to escape.
It is the definitive physical sign of an abduction. Gangi traces the license plates. He finds out the car belongs to a woman. He is literally holding the thread that could unravel the entire mystery right then and there in 1983.
And then what happens?
And then his superiors at SISDE pull him off the case.
They just stop him.
They order him to stand down. They remove him from the investigation entirely. He is explicitly told to back off.
But why? If you have an intelligence agent who has found the probable getaway car, why on earth do you pull him?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? This is the first major red flag in the files that suggests this wasn't just a local crime.
Right, because if it was just some local pervert with a BMW, you let the police catch him. You want the win.
Exactly. You don't burn a Secret Service agent's lead for a common criminal.
Yeah.
This deeply suggests that whoever was in that car had protection. High-level protection.
So because of that interference, the trail goes cold, the family is panicking. They put up 3,000 posters all over Rome.
The face of Emanuela, that famous black and white photo of her looking over her shoulder with the headband, it becomes iconic overnight.
And then the phone calls begin. The Italian press actually refers to this specific period as the season of poison crows.
Poison crows, it's such a dark, evocative name.
It implies these callers were scavenging on the family's grief.
They were, but they were also incredibly sophisticated. This wasn't just random noise or prank calls. The first significant call comes from a guy calling himself Pierluigi.
And Pierluigi creates this elaborate, believable fiction.
He claims to be 16 years old. He tells the family he's in a restaurant near Piazza Navona. He says he met a girl who called herself Barbarella.
Barbarella.
Yeah, that's the alias she allegedly gave him. He says this Barbarella was selling Avon products, but then he drops details that the public did not know yet.
He mentions her fluke.
He mentions the flute and he mentions her glasses.
What was the specific detail about the glasses?
He tells them she wears glasses when she plays the flute, but she hates them, so she takes them off as soon as she's done.
Wow. That is a very specific, intimate detail about Emanuela's personal habits.
It proved he had either surveilled her extensively or he was holding her and she told him that.
Then shortly after, we get another caller. Mario.
Mario claims to run a bar near the Ponte Vittorio. He says he saw a girl from Venice who called herself Barbara.
Again with the Barbara alias. It's consistent.
Right. And Mario says this girl told him she had run away from home, but, and this is just cool, she said she would return in September for her sister's wedding.
Which was a true fact. Her sister Natalina was getting married that September.
So you see what they're doing. These callers are weaving verifiable truth with lies. They're keeping the family completely on the hook, making them believe she is alive, just wandering around Rome selling cosmetics because she's a runaway.
It's pure psychological torture.
It really is. But then the narrative suddenly shifts gear entirely. It goes from a runaway girl story to an international hostage crisis. And it starts with the Pope.
Yes, July 3, 1983. Pope John Paul II steps out to his window for the Sunday Angelus, and he speaks her name.
He makes a public, global appeal to the kidnappers to release Emanuela Orlandi,
Which officially confirms to the world that she has been kidnapped.
It legitimizes the crime. And almost the exact moment the Pope speaks, the caller known as the American enters the chat.
The American. This is the voice that completely dominates the next phase of the mystery.
He speaks with a very distinct Anglo-Saxon accent. He sounds professional, cold, and incredibly direct. He calls the Vatican, he calls the family, he calls news agencies.
And he drops the whole Avon runaway story completely.
Completely gone. He says, "We are holding the citizen Emanuela Orlandi. We will release her only if the Italian state releases Ahmed Aliaka."
Okay, we definitely need to unpack this for the listener, because this is where the plot might get a little lost. Who is Aliaka, and why would anyone trade a teenage schoolgirl for him?
This is where the Cold War context is absolutely vital to understand. 2 years earlier, in 1981, Mehmet Aliaka shot Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square.
Right, the famous assassination attempt.
Exactly. Aga was a Turkish hitman, a known member of the Grey Wolves, which was a far-right extremist group. He was already imprisoned in Italy for the shooting.
But the prevailing theory at the time wasn't that he was just some lone Turkish radical acting on his own. The dominant theory was that he was a gun for hire for the Soviet Union.
Yes. This is known historically as the Bulgarian connection. You have to remember, the Pope was Polish.
He's John Paul II.
Right, and he was the spiritual inspiration and a major logistical supporter for the Solidarity movement in Poland, which was actively crumbling the Soviet grip on Eastern Europe.
So the Kremlin wanted him dead.
Desperately. The working theory of Western intelligence was that the KGB hired the Bulgarian Secret Service, who in turn hired Aga to pull the trigger so it couldn't be traced back to Moscow.
So if it's proven that the Soviets are behind the assassination attempt on the Pope, it's a massive, unprecedented geopolitical disaster for them.
Right. And this brings us directly to the Stasi theory in our sources. There are documents and later testimony from former East German Stasi and KGB agents that suggest the kidnapping of Emanuela, or at least the claim of kidnapping her, was a massive distraction operation.
Codename. Operation Pabst.
Operation Pope.
The goal was to just muddy the waters.
Exactly. Think about it. If a group calls up and demands Akka's release in the name of a Turkish anti-Christian front, which is what they call themselves on the phone, it reinforces the idea that Akka was just a religious fanatic acting for a Turkish cause.
Not a political hitman acting for Moscow.
Precisely. They use the girl as a geopolitical prop. They're saying, look, his radical followers are kidnapping citizens in Rome. He must be a religious extremist leader.
It totally deflects attention away from Bulgaria and the KGB.
It's a classic intelligence misdirection.
But, you know, here is my issue with the spy story when I was reading through the files. It feels so asymmetrical. Would the KGB really orchestrate the kidnapping of a random 15-year-old girl just to distract from an assassination attempt?
It seems desperate, doesn't it?
It seems extremely desperate.
And messy.
And it is messy, which is exactly why many experts today, looking back at the files, believe that the Stasi didn't actually kidnap her.
They just opportunistically jumped on the bandwagon.
Exactly. They saw a high-profile girl go missing in Rome. They saw the Pope publicly appeal for her, giving it massive media attention. And they said, great, let's use this.
They just started making the phone calls, pretending to be the kidnappers to push their Turkish front narrative.
That is a very strong possibility. So the American might have just been an intelligence officer reading a script in a basement somewhere who had absolutely no idea where the real Emanuela actually was.
Because while the spies were playing these grand geopolitical games on the phone, the actual physical evidence on the ground in Rome was pointing somewhere much closer to home.
It was pointing straight to the Roman underworld.
Let's pivot to the mob story, the Banda della Magliana. If you are Italian, just hearing that name sends a shiver down your spine. In the 70s and 80s, the Banda della Magliana wasn't just a street gang. They were essentially a holding company for crime.
They ran everything.
The drugs, the gambling, the prostitution networks. And they had deep, documented links to far-right terrorists and even elements of the Italian secret services. They were considered untouchable.
And for a long time, there were whispers and rumors, but no solid proof linking them to Emanuela. Until 2005.
The year 2005 changed the trajectory of this entire case. An anonymous caller phoned into the live TV show Ci l'ho visto, which, for context, is the absolute institution for missing persons television in Italy.
And the caller said something incredibly cryptic on the air.
He said, to find the solution to the case, go and see who is buried in the crypt of the Basilica of Sant Apollinare.
Sant Apollinare. That's the exact same church attached to the music school where she vanished in 1983.
The very same complex. Now, getting buried in the crypt of a Roman basilica is a massive deal.
You usually have to be a cardinal, a canonized saint, or royalty. Space is highly limited, and it is sacred ground.
So investigators get authorization, they go into the crypt, and they do find a tomb, but it's certainly not a cardinal.
It is the tomb of Enrico de Pedis.
Known on the streets as Renatino, he was the boss of the Banda della Magliana, a man with a rap sheet as long as the Tiber River. He was gunned down in the street in 1990.
How on earth does a mafia boss get buried in a basilica? That's insane.
That is the core of the scandal. The official explanation from the rector of the church at the time was that de Pedis was a great benefactor to the poor.
A benefactor? The man was a drug lord.
A drug lord who seemingly gave a lot of dirty money to the church. But the sources suggest a much darker transaction took place. The burial was authorized by Cardinal Paletti, who was the vicar of Rome.
And the prevailing theory in the files is that this prime burial real estate was a favor returned.
A favor for solving a problem. And this links us directly to the Vatican Bank, known as the IOR.
We know that in the early 80s, the Vatican Bank, under the leadership of Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, was involved in massive money laundering.
They were funneling millions upon millions of dollars to Poland to fund solidarity and fight communism.
Or where does a bank get that kind of off-the-books cash?
From the mafia. The theory is that the Banda della Magliana was giving their illicit drug profits to the Vatican Bank to wash. The Vatican Bank uses it for covert geopolitical ops. But then, the Banco Ambrosiano, which was deeply tied to the Vatican Bank, collapsed spectacularly. The money just vanished.
So the mob lost their investment.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. And you don't just write off a loss like that with the Roman mafia, you want it back.
So the kidnapping of Emanuela was leverage.
That is the money motive theory. The mob kidnapped a Vatican citizen to apply agonizing pressure on the Vatican Bank to return the money. You took our cash, we took your girl. Pay up.
This brings us to a crucial witness in the files, Sabrina Minardi.
Sabrina Minardi was Enrico de Pedis' lover. She was this glamorous, tragic figure in the Roman underworld, but by 2006 she was burned out, really struggling with severe addiction issues. But she decided to finally talk to prosecutors.
And reading her testimony is like reading a script for a horror movie.
She claims she was physically there. She says she personally helped kidnap Emanuela on DePedis's direct orders.
She describes holding Emanuela in a house in Torvaianica, which is a coastal town near Rome.
She talks about keeping the girl heavily sedated with drugs in a makeshift dungeon.
And she even implicates Archbishop Marcinkus directly, doesn't she?
She does. She claims that eventually she drove a drugged Emanuela to a gas station inside the Vatican walls, handed her over to a man dressed as a priest, and that Marcinkus was sitting in a car right nearby overseeing the transfer.
It's a wildly cinematic claim, almost too cinematic. Is she credible?
That's the major problem prosecutors faced. She got dates wrong. She was confused about timelines. Her long-term drug use had clearly affected her memory. So legally speaking, her testimony was shaky.
But, and this is a really big but, she knew things she simply shouldn't have known unless she was involved.
Exactly. She led police directly to the basement where she claimed Emanuela was held in Torvaianica, and they found inscriptions on the wall. She knew architectural details about the house that were completely verified.
And remember Mario, the caller from the Poison Crows season, the guy with the bar.
Yes. Another Magliana gang member who turned state's evidence, Antonio Mancini, listened to that old voice recording of Mario.
And what did he say?
He said, "Yeah, I know that voice. That's Raffetto,
Giuffetto.
a known low-level enforcer for the gang." So we have a verified voice match linking those early phone calls directly to the Banda della Magliana.
So, logically, in 2012, prosecutors decide to open DePedis' tomb in the Basilica. If the anonymous tip was look in the tomb to solve the case, the expectation was that Emanuela's remains might actually be hidden in there with him.
It was an absolute media circus, tents outside the church, cameras everywhere. They open the crypt, they open the diamond-encrusted coffin of the mob boss, and it's just him. Emanuela isn't there.
So the mob theory hits a wall, physically speaking. But the web of connections, the money, the burial, the voice match, it's just too strong to ignore.
It absolutely suggests the mob was involved, but the question shifts. Were they the architects of the kidnapping, or were they just the contractors hired to clean up a mess?
Because there is a third major theory in the source documents, one that is perhaps the most disturbing of all.
The theory that the true danger didn't come from Moscow, and it didn't come from the streets of Rome. It came from inside the vestry.
The Vatican sex scandal theory.
This is the theory that Emanuela was the victim of sexual predation within the Vatican itself.
We really have to talk about Pino Nicotri here. He's an investigative journalist who has pushed this angle very hard in his books.
Nicotri argues that there was no kidnapping in the traditional sense, no international plot, no street snatching. He believes Emanuela was attending what he politely calls convivial meetings.
Which is basically a euphemism for sex parties.
Exactly. Private parties involving high-ranking clergy and foreign diplomats. His theory is that on that hot June day, something went terribly wrong at one of these gatherings.
Maybe she resisted, maybe it was a drug overdose, maybe it was an accident, but she died.
And the entire kidnapping story, the KGB, the mob, the Avon lady, was all a massive orchestrated smokescreen invented after the fact to hide the body and the crime.
To completely distract the police from the fact that a teenage Vatican citizen had died in a Vatican apartment or garden.
There was a recording released very recently, in 2022, that strongly supports this. It's known as the Fixer tape.
This is a secret recording of a man named Marcello Neroni. He was the guy who moved fluidly between the mob and the secret services.
In the tape, he is talking about the Orlandi case, and he says something very specific. He says, the Vatican asked DePedis to get rid of the problem.
The problem being Emanuela's body.
Right. He heavily implies that the clergy killed her, accidentally or otherwise, and then panicked. So they called their friend, the mob boss, to quietly dispose of the remains.
And the transactional nature of it is chilling. We will bury you in the basilica if you make this girl disappear for us.
It ties the competing theories together perfectly. It's a unified field theory of corruption. The church commits the sin, the mob cleans up the physical evidence, and the spies create the media distraction.
And it is supported by Father Gabriele Amorth, of all people.
The Vatican's own chief exorcist.
A man who literally spent his entire life fighting evil. Before he died, he stated publicly that he believed Emanuela was a victim of a pedophile ring operating inside the Vatican.
He famously said, the devil is in the Vatican.
But as with all these theories, we have to ask, is there a paper trail? because rumors and tapes are one thing, official documents are another.
And this brings us to the London Trail.
This is one of the most explosive and controversial pieces of evidence we have in the entire file. In 2017, the journalist Emiliano Fittipaldi published a stolen document from the Vatican archives.
It was part of the massive Vataleaks scandal.
I have the summary of this document here. It's 5 pages long. It's officially titled, Summary of Expenses Incurred by the Vatican City State for the Activities Related to Citizen Emanuela Orlandi.
And the dates on this ledger cover 1983 all the way to 1997.
Wait, 1997? That's 14 years after she disappeared.
Exactly. If this document is authentic, it means she didn't die in 1983. It means she was kept alive, and the Vatican was secretly paying for her upkeep for over a decade.
Let's look at the actual line items on this ledger. They are incredibly banal and yet utterly terrifying.
You see things like transfer to London, board and lodging.
Medical expenses at St. Mary's Hospital, tuition fees.
The total amount listed is 483 million lira over those 14 years. The implication here is that they shipped her out of Rome immediately to avoid the scandal erupting locally and hid her in a hostel in London.
The address specifically linked to this theory by investigators is 176 Clapham Road. It was a hostel run by the Scalabrini fathers.
A Catholic hostel.
Right, so the theory is she lived there for 14 years, either sedated, coerced, or just hidden away from the world. And then when you look at the final entry on the ledger in 1997,
Transfer of remains to Vatican City.
that is the line that just breaks your heart. Transfer of remains.
It suggests she died in London in 1997, and the church brought her body back via diplomatic pouch or private flight to bury it inside the Vatican walls to ensure it was never, ever found by British or Italian authorities.
Now, obviously, the Vatican officially says this document is a complete fake.
They labeled it false and ridiculous. And to be fair to the skeptics out there, the formatting of the document is a bit weird. It's not on the official standard letterhead you might expect from that era.
So it could be a forgery created simply to blackmail someone inside the church.
It very well could be. But Pietro Orlandi, her brother, found something else that makes it much harder to just dismiss the London connection entirely.
He found a letter from the Archbishop of Canterbury addressed to a Vatican cardinal, and it explicitly mentions Emanuela.
It suggests a private meeting in London to discuss her situation.
Naturally, the Archbishop's office denies it's authentic.
Of course they do. But it's yet another piece of paper pointing directly to London. If the expense report is a fake, whoever made it knew exactly where to point the finger to hurt the Vatican the most.
Okay, so we've extensively covered the spies, the mob, and the priests. But there is one more hypothesis in the sources that we really have to address. The serial killer.
This is the work of Judge Otello Lupacchini and the journalist Max Parisi. They decided to zoom out and look at the macro data for Rome.
And they found a terrifying pattern. Between 1982 and 1990, 12 young girls went missing in Rome under similar circumstances.
12 girls.
12. And they were never found. And one of them, Morella Grigori, vanished just 40 days before Emanuela.
Morella Grigori. That name is always linked to Emanuela's now. She was also 15 years old. She was also lured away by a conversation about a job.
She told her mother she was going down to the street to meet a friend who had a job for her, and she never came back upstairs.
And then, years later, a man named Marco Accetti enters the story in a bizarre way.
Marco Accetti is quite a character. He's a local photographer. In 2013, he casually walks into the prosecutor's office and confesses to everything.
He says, "It was me. I kidnapped Emanuela. I kidnapped Morella."
He claimed it was all part of a convoluted blackmail campaign against the Vatican's anti-communist policies.
To prove it, he produced a flute. He said it was Emanuela's actual flute from that day.
The family looked at it and said, well, it looks exactly like hers. But forensics couldn't pull any DNA off it after 30 years.
So most people at the time wrote Accetti off as a narcissist, right? A mythomaniac just inserting himself into a famous case for media attention.
That was definitely the consensus, just a crazy guy looking for the spotlight. Until May 2024, just a few months ago.
What happened in 2024?
A brand new forensic sound assessment was performed using modern technology. They took the old audio tapes of the caller who demanded the IGA swap, and they compared them directly to Marco Accetti's voice.
And the result?
The analysis found an 86% match.
86%. That's incredibly high for voice forensics, especially on old, degraded tape.
It's highly statistically significant. It heavily suggests that Marco Accetti was, in fact, the American.
So even if he didn't physically kidnap her himself, He was the voice on the phone orchestrating the terror.
Exactly. He might have been the actor hired to play the role of the international kidnapper.
Which just brings us right back to the central question. Hired by whom? Was he hired by the Stasi? By the Magliana mob? By a rogue faction inside the Vatican?
A shetty is the loose thread that might actually connect all these disparate theories.
It really feels like a hall of mirrors. Every single time you think you find the floor, a trapdoor opens.
And recently, literally, trapdoors have been opening. Let's talk about 2019.
The physical search for her remains has really intensified. In 2019, the family's lawyer received an anonymous letter. It contained just a photo of a statue of an angel located in the Teutonic Cemetery, which is deep inside the Vatican walls.
And the caption on the photo?
It just said, "Search where the angel looks."
It sounds exactly like a plot from the Da Vinci Code.
It really does, but the Vatican took it incredibly seriously. They actually agreed to open the tombs situated right beneath where the angel was looking.
These were the historic tombs of two 19th century noblewomen, Princess Sophie and Duchess Charlotte.
So the media gathers, the forensic teams go in, and they lift the heavy stone slabs, and the tombs are empty.
What do you mean empty, like Emanuela wasn't there?
I mean swept, completely clean, no Emanuela, but
Wow.
also no Princess Sophie, no Duchess Charlotte. The historic bones of the people who were supposed to have been there for a century had vanished too.
That is absolutely baffling. Where did the royals go?
Nobody knows. During the search, they did find a secret concrete chamber nearby with thousands of bone fragments, but radiocarbon analysis showed they were hundreds of years too old to be Emanuela.
So it was another agonizing dead end.
But it proved one very important thing. The Vatican underground is a place where things and people can be moved and hidden without a trace.
And then, just as the Vatican opens its new official investigation in 2023, they drop an absolute bombshell. But it's not about the mob or the Vatican Bank. It's about Emanuela's family.
This is the Uncle Mario file, and frankly, it was a very ugly, controversial moment.
The Vatican released old correspondence to the media, not to the prosecutor, but to the press, suggesting that Emanuela's uncle, Mario Meneguzzi, had sexually harassed her older sister, Natalina, back in 1978.
Which is 5 years before the kidnapping. They also conveniently pointed out that Uncle Mario somewhat resembled the original police sketch of the Avon Man.
They were clearly trying to say, look, it wasn't a Vatican conspiracy. It was domestic abuse. It was the uncle.
It was a very transparent attempt to pivot the media narrative, to make it a dirty domestic tragedy rather than a state-level cover-up.
But the family fought back immediately and fiercely.
Natalina held a live press conference. It was incredibly brave of her. She admitted that yes, in 1978, her uncle had made inappropriate verbal advances. She was young, she was scared, but she flatly rejected him. It stopped. It was completely over.
And crucially, she provided a rock-solid alibi for him for 1983.
She confirmed that on the exact day Emanuela vanished, Uncle Mario was on a family vacation in the mountains. He wasn't even in Rome. He physically couldn't have been the Avon Man outside the Senate.
So the family and their lawyers see this release as a malicious distraction tactic.
They called it a low blow. They believe the Vatican released this file to smear the family's reputation and slow down the momentum of the parliamentary commission.
It totally backfired, though. It just made the Italian public even more angry at the Vatican's defensive tactics.
Which leads us to one more piece of testimony that we simply cannot ignore. It comes from Giancarlo Capaldo. He was the chief prosecutor in Rome for years, and he claims that he almost solved it.
This is known in the files as the negotiation. Capaldo says that in 2012, two high-ranking Vatican emissaries, we're talking men directly under the Pope, came to his office in secret.
They had a massive PR problem. The tomb of De Patis in the Basilica was a huge embarrassment. The media was swarming the church daily. They desperately wanted the mob boss moved.
They asked the prosecutor for a favor. Let us move the body quietly.
And Capaldo, being a seasoned prosecutor, saw an opening. He said, "Okay, I will help you move the mob boss out of your church, but you have to give me something in return. You have to give me Emanuela."
He point blank asked for the girl.
He said, "Dead or alive, just give us the truth. Give us the files. Give us the remains. Let the family have peace."
And what did the emissaries say?
According to Capaldo, they said yes. They accepted the deal. They were actively preparing to hand over the secret documents and reveal where the body was hidden.
So why didn't it happen? If they agreed, why are we still here?
Because the leadership at the prosecutor's office changed. Capaldo was abruptly replaced by a new chief prosecutor, Giuseppe Pignatone.
And Pignatone just ordered the tomb to be moved. No deal required, No swap.
The Vatican got exactly what they wanted. The PR embarrassment was removed from the basilica, and they gave absolutely nothing in return.
That is infuriating. It feels like every time someone gets close, whether it's Gongi the spy finding the car or Capaldo the prosecutor making a deal, they miraculously get removed from their post.
It highlights the central theme we started with today, the mechanism of silence. Whether it was the Magliana gang doing the dirty work, or the Stasi playing geopolitical games, or a predator in a cassock, the system always protected itself.
So here we are, it's 2026. The 3 investigations are ongoing. But the person I just keep thinking about is Pietro.
Pietro Orlandi. He has spent his entire adult life fighting a sovereign state that has absolute immunity.
He walks the streets of Rome with his posters. He goes on TV constantly. He confronts cardinals in the street.
He simply refuses to let his little sister become just a forgotten footnote in Vatican history.
You know, there's that quote from Pope Francis in the files. Shortly after he was elected, he met briefly with the family. And he said something that was probably meant to be comforting.
He looked at them and said, Emanuela is in heaven.
Emanuela is in heaven.
To a priest, maybe that just means, we pray for her soul. But to Pietro and to the family's lawyers, that sounded like a devastating slip of the tongue.
It sounded like a confirmation.
Exactly. You don't say someone is in heaven unless you know for a fact they are dead. If there is even a 1% chance she is alive in a convent somewhere, you say, we pray for her safe return. You don't speak of a missing teenager in the past tense.
That sheer ambiguity is what haunts every page of this case.
And that brings us to the final provocative question we want to leave our listeners with today. Why now?
Right. After 40 years of rejecting rogatory letters, those formal international requests for evidence that Italy sent, why is the Vatican suddenly opening its files and investigating itself?
Is it genuine transparency from a new generation of leadership? Or is it ultimate damage control?
Are they trying to finally give the Orlandi family peace? Or do they know that the truth is about to come out anyway, perhaps through the new Italian Parliamentary Commission, and they just want to control the blast radius?
That is the question you have to mull over. This case is a massive puzzle with bloody pieces from the Cold War, the Mafia, and the Holy See.
And somewhere in the middle of all that geopolitical noise is a 15-year-old girl with a flute, waiting for a ride that never came.
Stay curious and keep your eyes on Rome.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.